Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast. This is Mike Higman. I'm with Adam Cruz. And if you listen to episode number 32, you know what this is already. If not, this is a shortened version of that episode. We have just the turkey calling sequences for you with Shane Simpson. Shane did an excellent job explaining what these calls are, how to do them, and gave us an example of them. And what we wanted to do is give you something with a short intro so you can get right into listening to it. And hopefully this is something that you can listen to over and over throughout the whole season. I know I learned a ton from this. You can tell listening to the episode that I don't know a ton about turkey calling. I'm really excited about listening to this one hundreds of times. Adam, how about you?
Yeah, man. Shane does an excellent job of not only using the calls, running the calls, but also explaining why you would use the calls you would in certain circumstances. So this is a piece of content that I'm going to come back to every single year.
All right, with that said, we don't want to listen to ourselves saying this over and over again. So let's go ahead and get out of the way and get straight to the calling. So what we wanted to do when we're going to line these calls up and learning how to do them, we want to start with more of the basics, how to do the beginning parts of each call. And then we'll get to some of the more advanced stuff where you're adding some more of these together.
We're actually pulling these all from the NWTF website, so if anyone wants to also kind of follow along and hear what the real turkey sounds like in comparison, you can definitely go check that out. But while you're doing that, or before you do that, or maybe even after you do it, if you could just tell us a little bit why you would use that particular call and when.
I think probably the best thing to start with would be the Yelp. If you can kind of give us the mechanics of how to do the Yelp and then tell us what it sounds like and if there's any key points that we need to know.
The Yelp is, and I hate to keep referring back to my mouth call mechanics tutorial, but that explains so much in it. And basically, in order to get a Yelp, you've got two parts of that sound. There's the front end and the back end. You got a clear start, and sometimes that front end is really short, clear note. It's almost difficult to hear it. Sometimes it's so short. But sometimes turkeys yelp and they have a very long, clear front end, and then it rolls over into the rasp. The part I mentioned earlier about picking a call that has a cut on the correct area of the top reed for your airway is vital to producing plain yelps and kikis and almost every turkey call you do. And what you want to do is, and Scott Hook actually showed or told me this years ago when I was getting into competition call. I was having trouble producing that clear whistle or that front end of a yelp or kiki, all those notes. And luckily, I had a call in my mouth with the correct cut for my airway. It was a reverse combo cut. And he said, "Shane, I want you to pretend like you're a cat and hiss." And so I did that. I said, he said, "Now put that call in your mouth and hiss again." And so I put the call in my mouth and I hissed. And that clear note came out just like that. And by hissing like a cat, what it did is it drew my tongue up a little bit. It put my tongue in the correct position. It created that air channel across my tongue. And on the left side, my tongue kind of leans over to the left side. And so it was right in that area where that reed was cut. That big gap was cut out of that top reed. So that's where I got my front end note. So before you ever start trying to make turkey sounds, you need to get back to selecting the correct cut call for you, whatever that may be. So once you get all this figured out and you can blow the call correctly and get air across those reeds correctly, you want to basically just hiss like a cat to get that clear note. And then just ever so slightly relax your tongue. And what happens is, as you relax the muscles in your tongue, that little channel of air that's going across that portion of the reed that has the big gap cut out of it, it relaxes and becomes wider to where the point of that channel accesses that top reed where it's no longer, there's no gap there anymore. And so it starts vibrating that top reed. That's where you get your rasp. So you're getting a clear front from that gap, that second reed right below the top reed. And then as you relax your tongue and that gap opens wider, you access the top reed, and so it rolls over to the rasp. And so this is what that sounds like. And you can hear as I relax my tongue, that gap, the channel opens up and I start getting that rasp. So basically, to get a yelp, you just kind of speed that process up. It's really quick transition between, I guess, a tightened tongue to a more relaxed tongue, and it sounds like this. So once you get that figured out, now you can do the plain yelp. And of course, you're going to, once you master the call a little bit, you can change the sound a little bit that you're creating. So there's a plain yelp right there. You'll notice sometimes she does a single yelp and then she just does 5 or 6 more and a little pause in between. She's just communicating with other turkeys by doing that plain yelp, maybe saying, "Where are you?" or "I'm over here." Just, communicating back and forth, trying to pinpoint each other's locations or just let them know where that particular turkey is at.
If you could, an assembly call.
Assembly call is basically, you got your mama turkey out there in her poults. And if some of the poults get separated or the mama hen, or they get lost or whatever reason, or she hears one of them crying to the mother, "Here I am, I'm lost, mommy, where are you?" That's her way of contacting them. And it's really just a long series of yelps. And then the hen will pause occasionally just to listen for the response from the babies. And if she doesn't hear a response, or if she hears a response and she wants to let them know, "Okay, keep coming this way, this is where I'm at," she gives another long series of yelps. And it's basically to tell her young turkeys or poults where she's located so they can locate her. And she may start off with a couple clucks at first, or she may just go straight into the yelp. And I'm going to start off with a few clucks first. And that may go on for quite a while, or that may be the end of it, depending on the severity of the situation. And if I don't know if I demonstrated it well enough, but you should be able to sometimes hear a little change in the pitch and the cadence of that hen as she's calling. A lot of times it's because she's walking around, she's looking, maybe she's getting a little more nervous, so she's speeding up her yelping, or just changing the pitch of it. And the assembly call is if you can do yelps, assembly call is easy one to transition to. You just do some longer series of yelps and maybe put some pauses into there to simulate that hen listening for a poult. So that's basically all it is, a long series of yelps. And like I said earlier, you can change the cadence and the pitch of the call a little bit, but if you can yelp, you can assembly yelp or assembly call.
Would you ever use that during the springtime?
I don't think so. I mean, it never hurts to do a long series of yelps, but I primarily use that in the fall, and I really don't use it a lot in the fall. I've done some fall hunting quite a bit in the last, 8 or 10 years, and I'm usually doing some plain yelps and some kiki runs, kikis, the younger birds, because we try to scatter the flock. If I'm working gobblers in the fall, I may do some gobbler yelps or jake yelps, and just some plain clucks like that. But assembly calls, I guess probably, I don't know. Let me look at the rest of the list. It may be one of the least used calls that I do.
Could you explain to us how you'd pull off doing the cut, and also what that would sound like?
Okay, the cut. I'll probably use the same call here. And it's a lot like the same way you would do a yelp. You have your tongue in the same position, almost like you're going to hiss like a cat to blow air, but you stop at that point. You basically just get your tongue in the position, and you do a quick burst of air across the call and stop real quick. And you can stop it by either just stopping the flow of air, or either kind of slamming your tongue up against the reeds to stop the movement of the reeds. And a cut, I guess best described as an agitated turkey and a little aggravated hen, and she's doing these loud pops, just to I don't know, to let the other turkey know, like, here I come, or you've upset me. I'm not positive what it actually means, but usually when you've upset a hen, she starts cutting at you and she starts coming your way, and she's not very happy. And a lot of times she's coming in to show you that she's the boss. And so it sounds a little bit like this. And a cut can vary in the number of cuts and how rapid it is. Sometimes cutting is just a single cut every second or two, and some of them sound like machine guns going off there, pop, 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 pop. And so it can vary greatly, but a cut has a distinctive sound to it. It's a very loud, a loud pop or cut. Sounds like two 2x4 slapping together. Actually, if you've been close to one in the woods, a hen, cutting is very loud. It's ear piercing.
Well, in what scenario would you be using that in?
Oh, that's my go-to call right there. If I'm having trouble with the gobbler, I've got gobbler with hens, and he's reluctant to break away from them. I've had so much success with cutting. We were actually there's two hunts I'll try and explain real quick how it benefited. One was a youth hunt, and we had gobblers roosted nearby, and they pitched down. It was early in the season, and they all headed to meet the other gobblers. You could hear hens and gobblers through the woods, and they all met up together or headed that way to meet up. And I decided I was just going to start cutting. And I've seen this work with wild hens getting near me, get aggravated, and start cutting. They draw in distant gobblers. And so when you do this, it's best just to lay it on, pour it on, and do it for several minutes straight. Don't just do a few cuts and then stop. And so that's what I did. I started cutting. I'd stop just long enough to catch my breath, and I'd keep cutting. Pop, 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 pop. And you could hear those birds firing up. They were just starting to hammer and gobble. And after about 2 minutes of doing this, they finally gobbled and they were closer. And so then I kind of backed off and kind of ended my cutting sequence and just waited. And in no time here they came out. Another instance was I had a hen come in and I was calling, and she saw me sitting in the brush and wasn't sure what I was. And I don't know if it was just maybe she heard my call and thought I was a turkey in the brush, but she was too afraid to come in there. And she was a little aggravated by the situation. She started cutting, and I cut back to her. And between the two of us cutting, a bird fired off in the distance, and all that racket of us cutting, he was just gobbling nonstop, and it didn't take him long to get to me. And so it's been a very very good call for me cutting over the years. It's really proved its worth.
Oh, that's really cool. All right, so we already covered the plain Yelp. How about the excited Yelp?
Well, the excited Yelp is basically a combination of plain Yelps that are a little more rapid in cadence and mixed in with some cutting. And so it's a hen that, she's aggravated, but at the same time, maybe not aggravated, but she's really excited, as the name implies, but also a little agitated. Especially, you'll hear this a lot of times when they're coming into your turkey call. If you're out in the woods calling and another hen hears it, it's kind of like, you'll hear sometimes, we'll talk about this in a little bit, a hen comes in doing a cluck and purr. It's really a cut and purr. She's aggravated. She'll do some cutting and purring. But oftentimes they'll also come in doing excited yelps. And this works for gobblers too, calling in gobblers, and they really seem to like it. I guess a little quick demonstration of the excited yelp goes a little something like this. Sound like a musician. Goes a little something like this. So here's the excited yelping. So you can probably kind of get the impression of the intensity of that call and how excited a hen or aggravated a hen could be doing that. And it, like I said, it really turns the gobblers on sometimes.
So sticking with the theme of yelps, but slowing it down, maybe show me and kind of go through a tree yelp, how a hen would yelp from the limb and how you would actually do it sitting under trying to call that gobbler in. And some people don't even do it. So if you wouldn't recommend it, please let the listeners know, but let them know what it sounds like.
Well, I do the tree call every time I hunt in the morning. If I know there's gobblers around nearby and I'm set up, I'm gonna do some tree calls to let them know where I'm at, and then I'll ramp it up as the morning progresses. Basically, a tree call, it's just like when we get up in the morning. You're a little lethargic, a little sluggish, and you're like, I think I'll go downstairs and make me a cup of coffee or whatever. It's kind of that muffled, muted speech, and so it's basically a yelp that's kind of muted, and the hen's not really opening her mouth all the way. She's just kind of yelp, yelp, yelp. And so using the same call you do all your other yelps on, you just basically, you still have your tongue in the position like you're hissing like a cat, but you just barely put a little bit of air across it, kind of like the little slight hisses. It's add a few little pips in there just to simulate some soft clucks, and I changed the pitch a little bit. I got some more whiny type tree yelps, and then I added a little more rasp, and it's all natural. You hear all those sounds in the woods, but that's kind of, you're trying to simulate or project to the gobbler or what other turkeys are out there that you're another hen that's just waking up in the morning and just making contact to the other birds first thing in the morning.
Man, I don't know about you, Adam, but just listening gets me excited about getting out in the woods again. Let's kind of keep going with this theme that we're on here, and why don't we do the fly down call? So you've been doing your calls to the bird in the tree, and I'm assuming next we're gonna do fly down.
Yeah, that's not something I use all the time, but I will do it. I actually do it in the evening when I roost birds, and I try to make them think I'm flying up. So you can do a fly down or a fly down, fly up or a fly down cackle. When I'm roosting birds, like I said, I may yelp a little bit on the ground, and if there's leaves around where I know they can hear it, I'll rake the leaves, especially if it's right at that fly up time and I know I can't call that gobbler in. I want him to at least go to bed with the impression there was another turkey nearby. And in the morning, especially if I roosted one the prior evening by doing a fly up cackle, in the morning I almost always do a fly down cackle to let that gobbler know, okay, that hen he heard yesterday evening just flew down. The fly down or fly up cackle, the turkeys usually cackle is kind of an exertion of energy. Just like if you're doing anything strenuous, you may grunt. Here's a good example. Watch a tennis match, and if it's a guy's or a girl's tennis match, you'll hear them as they hit the ball back and forth. Same thing with turkey. When they're exerting that much force, a lot of times it causes them to cackle. Not all of them do it. A lot of times I think it depends on how they fly down. If they just kind of drop out of the tree and glide down to the ground, they may not cackle. If they have to leap off the limb to clear another tree in front of them, another limb, then they may cackle. But basically it's if you can cut on a mouth call, just put a bunch of cuts together, make it sound natural. Try to listen to some audio of turkeys cackling as they fly down and kind of mix up the rhythm of it. Even change the pitch up a little bit as you do it. And so a cackle, I hope this call is going to be able to do it, but I'm going to try and do a fly down cackle or fly up cackle. You want me to do some tree yelps also as I'm about to fly down, or just kind of build up to the fly down cackle, or how would you like me to do it?
Yeah, let's go through the build up.
Something like that. Not always exactly the same, but you kind of hear that up and down of the pitch as she's flying down, and she's avoiding limbs as she comes down to the ground. She's changing her body position. So, and I don't think you have to be that exacting or sound incredibly awesome at it. As long as you can put a series of cuts together like that, and it doesn't hurt to take your hat and slap it against your chest to sound like wing beats as you come down to add a little realism.
Next, let's try a locator call. So we talked a little bit about owl hoot in the beginning. Could you let a owl hoot rip for us, and could you also tell us when you would do it? I know some people only do it in the evenings before the birds roost, and some people only do it in the mornings and not in the afternoon. So if you could kind of go over that as well.
Yeah, I love an owl hooter for a locator call. I actually use it on up in the day. I prefer it over a crow call. That's my coon dog you just heard bark probably.
That's the coon dog call.
Yeah, I don't take her turkey hunting, but at any rate, first thing in the morning I'm gonna use an owl hooter, and later in the day I might use it. But once it gets up in the day, later in the day, I primarily just try to locate with turkey calls. With a pot call like I was talking about early on, a glass surface that'll reach out there. But in the morning, that's usually when I use locator calls, and it's primarily an owl hooter. And I usually start off, because you never know how far away or how close those gobblers are going to be. I start off with just a single woo, and that way if they gobble, I actually hear it. If I'm trying to do a long series of owl hoots, I may not hear it if they gobble right away. Anyway, it would sound something like this. If I don't hear anything after that, then I may go into an 8 note of the owl hoot. And if I still don't hear anything, then I start ramping up and adding some of that caterwauling you hear from owls sometimes. It sounds like monkeys going crazy in the tree. A laugh of the owl is commonly called, and it sounds a little bit like this. And hopefully one gobbles by then. And I don't do a lot of the laughing, and not nearly as much as I would do on the competition stage, because my goal is to hear them gobble. And if I'm too busy doing a bunch of caterwauling and hooting, they'll gobble and I won't even hear it because of my own calling. So I try to keep those hoots, the notes. I try to keep. It's hard to hear in my routine, but there's short breaks in between my hoots, and that's just so I can hear maybe the little reverb of a gobble if he finally decides to gobble while I'm hooting. But I try to keep it all fairly short, and I kind of build the calling up until I get to that laughing or caterwauling.
Were you using your natural voice there, or was that actually a call?
I wish. No, that's an owl hooter. This is Harrison Hooting Stick. Hooks makes these or sells these.
Okay. I was going to say, if that was your natural voice, you have probably won every competition you've ever been in. So
this is actually
that was really good.
Yeah, that would be awesome if I could sound like this. But this is actually the call I run on competition. I actually use the same call in the turkey woods. I try to, some people like owl hooter that's just loud. As realistic as possible, but loud. You're always going to make sacrifices with these owl calls. The ones that sound a little more realistic, a little more mellow, they don't carry quite as far. The ones that sound a little raspy are usually a little louder. I'm a sucker for realism in the woods or on the stage, so I use the same call for the competition and in the woods. My thought on that is, a lot of folks don't care that if the owls don't know they're not a real owl. I want every critter out there to think I'm a real critter talking also, and it's worked to my advantage. And I don't want to get off on another tangent here, but I'll give you a quick story where it's worked in the past. I was owl hooting one morning trying to get a turkey to gobble, locate a bird, and I wasn't hearing anything around me. But I finally got a barred owl to respond to me, and that barred owl must have been a half mile away, it sounded like. And when it started hooting back to me, a bird gobbled near it. Now, I was too far away from my owl hooting to trigger that gobble. but that other owl thought I was a real owl, hooted back, and it shot a gobble out of a nearby gobbler. And so then the chase was on. I knew which way to go. So being realistic with all your calling, not only your turkey calling, but your crow calling, your owl hooting, everything you do in the woods can benefit you whether you know it or not.
All right, next I think we want to get to the cluck and the putt. And I guess let's start with the putt, and then we'll move to the cluck after that.
Well, we can just skip the putt altogether. You don't ever want to putt in the woods.
Hey Shane, the reason I wanted to hear the putt is I want the listeners to hear how similar they sound and how dangerous that can be if you're trying to cluck but you're actually putting.
Very good. So
point. Give us the what to do and what not to do scenario.
I feel like I've been set up.
By me?
Yeah.
I'd never do that.
Maybe. Hey guys, watch this.
Yeah, so the putt can sound a lot like a cluck. And if you've been around me and we've talked about this in the past, anyone that's been around me, I will explain to them that's why I always throw in a few yelps. If I'm clucking and purring, I'll throw a few yelps at the end of it. And that's just because I don't want a turkey to think I ended with a putt. You know, if you're not careful, doing a turkey call and sound exactly like a cluck, you can come off sound like a putt. And I've seen them on videos other people post on YouTube where turkey's out in front of them and they're like yelping softly, and then they try to cluck and they actually do a sharp kind of putt sound. All the turkeys pop their head up to attention. You know, it wasn't you in the situation, you knew it wasn't intentional. I guess a putt would come in handy if you wanted to get the gobbler's head up, if you were ready to shoot him if he was in range, but you're playing with fire there. A putt could also send that gobbler running. He may not even throw his head up. If he hears a putt, he may just bolt. And so playing with fire with a putt, it's an alarm call. And depending on the severity of the putt or how intense it is, can really put the birds on edge. So try to avoid that if all possible. I will attempt to do a putt. It's not something I usually practice. I actually have to flip the call over, and it still may not sound like a putt. I usually flip it over and try to cluck with my mouth call upside down so the cut reeds are on the bottom now. And I'm also producing the sound different. I'm using the tip of my tongue to press against the reeds, and then I build pressure, and then I release my tip of my tongue so it pops the reeds. I hope that came across with what I was hearing here. It's kind of it's a very hard call to describe. You have to hear it. It's a pop, but a thump also. You can hear it. You can feel it in your body when they do it if you're close enough to them. Now with
it almost feels like they're putting you on alert.
Yeah.
Makes your heart jump a little bit.
Yeah, you can. It's what it feels like. It feels like they touched your heart and just thumped it. I mean, because it really resonates in your body. It's a loud pop, and I'm sure the turkeys nearby feel it too.
I think that's just a feeling of your heart breaking because you know that thing's about to turn around.
I know that sound all too well.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've heard it. I think and since I video all my hunts these days, I can actually verify it by going back and looking at footage. I think it was the 2016 Wisconsin turkeys. I had 3 of them come in. It's the one I posted not long ago. I called it Gobbler Fest because they were gobbling their heads off. And the back one saw me move, and he said, and the other 2 stopped and turned around, and then he putted one more time with some urgency, and they really started getting it, and I had to swing real quick and shoot one. So that's the last time I think I heard a putt. Well, at least before I killed a turkey. They may have putted after the gunshot. Those don't count.
Hey man, if you need some video footage of that, you're more than welcome to come hunt with me anytime. I get to hear it every year.
I'm not trying to recruit putt footage.
Just checking.
How
about the cluck? Let's do that one next.
Alrighty. This is a little more difficult for me to do because I don't practice it a whole lot. Well, I do, but it's more like a cut than a cluck. A cluck has it's a softer call, more of a little poppy sound. But I'll try my best to recreate it. I actually got the wrong call here. Oh, there we go. Now clucks can vary depending on the subspecies or the turkey. Sometimes I hear, especially out west, Merriam's and Rio type birds, where they do more of a pip than a cluck. And it sounds like this. So those birds out west are a little more pippy in their calling, and so you hear that a lot of times in place of the cluck. But it's basically just the cluck is more of a attention getter. It's like, hey, trying to get the attention of the turkeys or let them know where they're at. It's you don't hear it a tremendous amount, I guess. I mean, I hear it every once in a while, but most times when I hear turkeys talking in the woods, they're either cutting at me or yelping at me or gobbling at me. But as far as the scale of how important it is to learn that, I could see some advantages to it, especially if you want to cluck and get a gobbler to pop his head up. Or if you don't want to do a whole bunch of calling, maybe you just want to get the turkey's attention. Like if you're trying to call to a hen, for instance, and you think there might be a gobbler in tow, you maybe just want to do one cluck so she hears it, but doesn't pinpoint your location. So, I mean, that there's kind of a toss-up. Depends on the hunter, how important it is to them. To me, I like using it occasionally, but it's not high up on my scale of calls to use.
I tell you what, let's go with a key run. And would you actually use the key in the spring turkey season?
Oh, yeah. I've used it. I wouldn't say quite a bit, but I've used it on enough occasions that it's you could almost call it commonplace. There's a lot of young birds out there in the spring woods, and in my opinion, from what I've witnessed, it seems to me that gobblers really respond well to higher pitch calling. And so if you're struggling to get a bird out, and you want to throw the kitchen sink at it, some people like to gobble at them, or do Jake yelps, or do whatever. Try something a little less hardcore and do some key runs. That high pitch of that key and the yelping sometimes will bring that gobbler in. If that doesn't work, then you can go into the fighting purrs or gobbling at a gobbler. Those are kind of your last resort calls. But a key is basically the front end of a yelp. I talked about earlier how to blow the call. So basically, just like you're producing a yelp, never roll over into that rasp. Never relax your tongue, and you get that clear front note. You just need to break it up a little bit and do like a young turkey does. It's a key. It's broken into little parts like that. And so then you can throw some yelps on the end. And what that is, if you pay attention to birds that are keying and then yelping, the cadence are very similar. And that's because a key is basically a turkey trying to yelp, but hasn't figured out quite how to do it. And its voice is breaking over into the yelp. Just like an adolescent or a teenager, they're hitting adolescence and their voice is changing. A young turkey is trying to yelp and can't quite figure out how to do it, and then their voice changes and it rolls over into the raspy yelp they get. And so the cadences are very similar. It's a yeep 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 yop yop yop. So you got to keep that the same when you're doing the call. But it's a great fall tool, and it's also a good call to use in the spring as well.
Have you heard turkeys use what I would call the whine call?
The whine?
I'm not going to try to replicate that.
The whine?
Do you use? Yeah, have you heard turkeys what's called whining?
Yeah, I used to raise turkeys, and mostly you hear it when they're feeding. It's usually associated with the clucks and purrs. I don't know how. What's the word I'm looking for? How good it is at learning birds or proving to them you're a real turkey. It doesn't hurt to add that authenticity. But I'll try to do a whine for you. Yeah, so I'm gonna do some clucks and purrs, and I'll add the whine in as I do it. Now I added a little extra there just so you could hear it, but that's basically it. When they're feeding, You can easily go on YouTube and find some footage of turkeys feeding. There's some on my website, I think, of pet turkeys in a pen while they're eating corn or something, and you can hear them doing that little that little whine they call it as they feed. It's not something you commonly hear out in the woods though, and like I said, I don't know how effective of a call it is to use in the woods. I rarely ever use it myself, but I use it on competition stages just to add realism.
Okay, so was that a purr you were mixing along with that?
I was doing the clucks and purrs of a feeding, contented hen, and then she's doing some whines in there with it.
So if we could go back and do the purr as well, that would be good. That's something I've had trouble with in the past, being able to get down. Seems like a little trickier to get it just right, but also seems something to be really useful.
Yeah, and doing the purr on a call, to me, I used to try to find a call that was good at purring, but it seems like to me, once you learn the technique, as long as you've got a call that has some good cuts in it, it doesn't matter what kind of cut it is. I've been using the same call to do everything for you guys tonight. It's a reverse combo. I key on it, I cluck and purr, I cut on it, I yelp, I gobble on it. And once you figure out the call that's right for your air channel, I mean, the magic door is going to open and you're going to see the light. I mean, all kinds of things are going to happen good for your calling. But basically, and there are several ways I guess you could purr. One way is to blow air across the reeds and then flutter your lips, kind of like a baby. Baby when you. The way I do it is if you're doing like mouthwash or use a mouthwash, you gargle. Gargling causes your tongue to flutter. A lot of people will say, I just flutter my tongue. Well, if you actually gargle, that will cause your tongue to flutter, and I think you get a real natural purr by doing it that way. So place your call in your mouth, and as you're blowing air, at the same time you're blowing air across the reeds, gargle, and that'll break up that rhythm of air, and that'll cause the purr. But you got to have a call with, well, I guess you could do it on a bat wing. Any call with that top reed has a nice cut in it where it gives you a little bit of rasp. That'll give some nice purrs. You can probably hear, because you're up close to me, you can hear that some other noises that the turkeys won't hear as I attempt to gargle or get my tongue to flutter. And I manipulate the sound that I'm getting. I kind of close my mouth up a little bit and my lips around the call to restrict that air a little bit and kind of muffle the sound to make it a little more realistic. So, I mean, play with it. Don't just blow air across it and gargle and produce a fluttery sound. Change the position of your lips and your mouth to kind of manipulate that sound and create a more realistic purr.
Could you follow that up with a fighting purr?
Yeah, fighting purr is basically done the same way as you do a clucking purr or a feeding purr, a contented purr. And there's my coon dog again barking. But anyway, a fighting purr is two turkeys. It's not just the males that fight. It can be any turkeys that fight. And basically it's a louder, more aggressive feeding purr is basically what it is. Now you can add some other sounds in there. You can add some half gobbles to add realism when you're doing this. Maybe slap your hat against you to sound like the wings of the turkeys hitting each other and get as realistic as you want to. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'll just do the fighting purr of, say, two gobblers that got close together. And I usually try to build it up. They're just getting into the fight and then they get a little more aggressive. And that's kind of the gist of it right there. And that is a very effective call to try to get those hung up gobblers or those hard to call gobblers. Maybe they got a hen out there with them and they don't want to leave the hen. Fighting purr can sometimes bring them in. It's also a great call if you're hunting with a buddy and there's several birds that come in and your buddy shoots one of them and the other two kind of run off. with that flopping turkey in front of you, if you can do some fighting purrs, that'll run them back in. So, sometimes they'll come in on their own to that flopping bird, but I've had birds run out there and stop and just look at this flopping bird, and start doing some fighting purrs, and they run on in. So it is a effective call for calling in hung up gobblers, henned up gobblers, and maybe spooked gobblers from a gunshot, if that's a description for them.
Shane, that sounds ridiculous to me. I feel like that is not going to be in my repertoire anytime soon. Do you have any stories or situations? Seems like a lot of these you do where you can recall using that.
Yeah, I have video of it too. Let's see, what was the one I'm off the top of my head that I know we used it. We used it last year in Wisconsin. Scott Ellis and I, when we hunted there. It brought the gobbler back in, but not into gun range and not into camera view. But it brought him closer after he came in and kind of got skittish and left. We did the fighting purr sequence, and it brought him in. It actually worked on a public land bird that we called in. He was kind of leery of the situation. He left. We started a fighting sequence. He came back in again, but never into gun range. The video I have is of a buddy. We were hunting in Minnesota trying to get his first turkey, and I'm not sure which year that was, but he finally got a crack at a gobbler, and we had some jakes out there in front of us and some toms, and they gobbled at the gunshot. And I told him, I said, sit back, watch this. And I started doing fighting purrs, and they started running our way. Even a hen was running our way, and he was going, what are they doing? I was like, just sit back and watch the show. He was kind of taken back about what was going on and how I was able to call him right back in. But they saw that flopping turkey. There was enough male turkeys out there together that a fighting purr brought them on in. They had their confidence up because they had their buddies with them to go whip up on this other turkey that's fighting or breeding a hen, whatever they thought it was doing. But as far as other hunts where it's just brought in birds, mainly I've used gobbles to actually draw in other turkeys. Fighting purr is something I usually use after a bird's been shot. To be honest, we've used it a few times here and there, but usually I save that for trying to draw in a bird after it's been spooked from a gunshot.
Since you mentioned the gobble, Shane, could you let a couple gobbles rip?
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to make a little excuse here if it doesn't sound so good. This call I gobble on really sounds best when it's been used for a while and the reeds have really soaked up some saliva and gotten saturated. So right now when I gobble, it's probably gonna sound a little pippy, but so don't score me too low on it. I'm just getting the reeds right. Sounds a little high pitched, more like a Miriam turkey, but that's my rendition of a gobble.
I was gonna say, man, I'm gonna score that one really, really high.
Good.
I'm glad I don't have my mouth calls out here. Everybody just laugh.
Can I tote you to the next turkey calling contest then? let you be the judge.
Yes, sir. Get me up there.
And how in the world do you do that?
My buddy Kerry Elliott, down in he's from Kentucky, I think. Pretty sure he is. He competes at Grand Nationals in the Goblin division. He does pretty good. And I went to him and some other gobbler competitors, and I asked him, I said, how do you guys gobble on a mouth call? And the way he explained it to me is to say the word tuh. I guess this is the one time I'm going to use a word to describe how to use a mouth call. But just say the word tuh, tuh. And that kind of puts your tongue in a similar position, like if you hiss like a cat, but maybe a little flatter. And if you just say tuh real quick, you can get that part of that gobble sound. So you just got to keep practicing until you get quick. When I first started doing it, I couldn't move my tongue quick enough. But after about 2 years, 3 years, I think it's about the third year of me playing around with the mouth call, trying to gobble, I've gotten fairly proficient with it to where it sounds somewhat realistic. And so basically that's what I'm doing. Tut, 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 tut.
And do you use that while you're hunting?
Oh yeah, that's not a bottom of the barrel kitchen sink type call there. That's a call I'd use in the middle of the hunt. I wouldn't be a last resort for me. It used to be a last resort because I couldn't gobble very well, and I did it on a hunt in Wisconsin a few years ago, about 2 years ago. Bird just wouldn't come to me. I called in a Jake, I called in a hen. They left the field. Just couldn't get this bird to come to me. He was gobbling well. He was gobbling to my calls, but he just wouldn't come. And so I finally decided, well, I'm going to try and gobble the best I can and see what it does. And I gobbled once, and he gobbled right back to me immediately before I even finished gobbling, I think. And I added some hen yelps or some cuts and excited yelps and gobbled again, and he replied again. And so then I just went silent. And it wasn't probably less than a minute here. He crested over the hill and come marching in. And so I was able to kill him. And after that day, I use it often, especially if I just get the slightest hint that this bird's got hens with him and I've got competition, I may gobble. And it's worked once or twice since that Wisconsin hunt.
Well, I know we've almost used your whole phone battery up already. I guess just a couple last things to close with. I wanted to go over a crow locator call, and then if you can kind of give us a quick summary of how you decide what locator call you're going to use. I know you can use turkey calls as well for locating. If you can kind of give us a quick rundown of that, that'd be great.
Well, I wish I had a crow call with me. I don't even know where it's at, but everyone knows what a crow sounds like. I don't use a crow call a whole lot, to be honest. I have one in my turkey vest, and I don't know why. It's just extra weight. Usually I use the owl hooter. But on the occasions that I do use a crow call, I wait. Number one, I wait until I hear other crows in the morning before I ever make a crow call. Because I'm all about that realism. I don't want to be out there crow calling if the other crows are still in the roost or still asleep. So I at least wait for that to happen. And I usually give just like with my owl hooting, I make a quick sequence of crow calls just so I can hear any response from any birds that may be nearby. So I may go just quick like that, and then listen. And if that doesn't work, then I kind of ramp it up and get into some longer something like that and try to elicit a gobble. But that's really a call I don't use a whole lot of. Other locator calls I've used in the past, and I do have one of these in my turkey vest. That's a goose call. And I started using that many years ago. I was hunting some pine plantation in South Carolina, and it wasn't a whole lot of turkeys there. And when you could find one, they were difficult to call in or just to get the gobble. And I'd been using my owl hooter that morning and a crow call, I think, and did some turkey calling. I was walking along a ridge, and I just got through using a locator call. I think it might have been my crow call. Wasn't sure. I'm not sure. It's hard to recall that far back. But at any rate, I remember that I stopped and made some calls and got no response. And I started to take a step, and a goose flew over and said, gobble, gobble, gobble. And I'm like, wow. And it did it again. It honked again, and that turkey gobbled again. I was like, I got to get me a goose call. So I do carry a goose call with me. Occasionally, I will use it if the other locator calls don't work. But as far as locator calls, it's a owl hooter, a crow call, a goose call, and a turkey call is my other locator call. That's about the ones I use for locating turkeys.
And do you sometimes just rotate through those to see what's working?
No, I'd say probably 90% of the time. That might be a fair percentage. I use the owl hooter. The goose is, it's worked in the past occasionally as a last resort. That's kind of a last resort thing to me. It worked that one time, and so that's kind of stuck in my head, and that's probably why I have it in my turkey vest. But it's not something I use often. The crow call gets used more than the goose, and so it's the owl hooter. I think owl hooter has the capabilities of getting the turkey to gobble better than a crow. At least it's been my experience. I used to hunt some swamp bottoms in South Carolina, some public land, and I could go in there with a crow call in the middle of the day, and I couldn't get a response. But maybe it's just because the location, they would eat that owl hooter up. Every time I'd blow an owl hooter, they'd just gobble at it. Maybe because an owl's more of a threat to a turkey than a crow is. Who knows? But it just seemed to work better for me, and I've had good success with it over the years, and so I've stuck with using it most of the time.
Well, Shane, I was really excited about having you on, mostly for selfish reasons. I lost the CD that came with my calls a few years ago, so I was looking for something else to go off of, and I was excited about having a podcast that we could play over and over again.
Are you still excited?
Man, you did not disappoint. I'm excited about what we got here, and I'm looking forward to listening back several times over.
Okay, I'm just glad you didn't say, "Oh shucks."
Hey man, I'll echo it. Every single year I whip out a instructional DVD or instructional CD and listen to that thing and just kind of get refreshed on all the calls, what they mean. I even have my little 6-year-old boy. He's doing the same thing. Now it's going to be pretty cool to have this interview to go back to and listen to it year after year. So I really appreciate you doing this. Enjoyed it.
Man, it's an honor for you guys to have me on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I really love talking turkey with anybody that wants to listen or wants to talk about it. Or, I like listening to other people talk about turkey hunting. Right now, turkey season is just around the corner. And in the little bit of time I have, I'm building turkey calls. I have podcasts, one form or another. I have may not be yours, but I'm listening to turkey podcasts because I really am into it right now, at least listening to other people's tactics and their input. And so it's kind of an honor for you guys to include me as part of one of the podcasts. And now I guess I can go listen to myself if I want to get really bored.
Well, Shane, I did get a chance to check out the website some, and I know you have a ton of videos on there. You've got actual calls of these different animals that we're going to be trying to recreate out in the wild. And you also sell a lot of gear on there. Maybe give us a rundown of what the website is, and then if you want to tell us what social media you're on as well, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah, I think we mentioned it a couple times. It's callingallturkeys.com. It's I also produce I guess a near real time, or how would you describe it? A near real time, I guess, is the best description. Web show, turkey hunting show, and it's aired on the Mossberg YouTube channel, but it's also on my website. It's kind of linked on there, embedded there. Basically, what I do is I travel the country and film the hunts and try to post them up as soon as possible, within days. You can also find some of my content or me on Facebook. I have my own personal page. Actually, that's full of friends, so you may have to just go to my public figure page and interact with me there. There's also a Calling All Turkeys page. There's an Instagram page, Calling All Turks. I believe that's it. I don't think they allowed so many words, but if you look on Instagram, Calling All Turkeys, it should bring it up. There's a Twitter account, but I don't tweet too much. It's mostly Instagram and Facebook, and then my website. So, and I'm pretty reachable. I mean, if you have a question you want to send me, if I got a free second or a free minute, I will do my best to answer it. So I like interacting with other turkey hunters. So there you go.
Well, thanks again, Shane. I can't thank you enough for this time, and I really enjoyed it.
Same here, Shane. Thank you.
My pleasure. And I'm glad you guys had me on. I really enjoyed it.